China during the SARS outbreak, and spent 20 years living in Vietnam, but working very closely with many countries in the region. So that's my background of where I come from. This infection, which has come about from the beginning of December, started, as you say, in an animal market in Wuhan, and probably was a virus that was infecting animals, most likely, I think, bats in that market, and it crossed the species barrier and it came into infecting humans who were working or visiting that market. Subsequently, through the month of December and then the early days of January, that infection spread from animal to human, but then most importantly from human to human. And now we are sort of the end of January, so we are about 6 weeks into this outbreak. This virus can now clearly spread between humans. It's spread by the respiratory tract. That means that somebody with symptoms would have a cough, a sore throat, and would pass it to somebody else by coughing or sneezing in the same way that influenza is spread around people. It is not SARS. The virus is in a similar family to SARS, but this looks different to SARS. And the difference is probably it's easier to pass between human beings. SARS was quite difficult to pass between humans, and people were most infectious when they had symptoms, and therefore it was relatively easy to bring the epidemic under control. When an infection spreads between humans easily, it's actually very difficult to bring the epidemic under control. And so there's a very big difference between SARS and what we believe we know about this virus so far. The infection is now spreading, of course, across China, and many cities in China have reported cases. Indeed, Singapore reported a case, and other countries have. And I think we can expect that there will be many more cases in China, and that there will be many more cases in other parts of the world. I would stress also, in comparison with SARS, that the infectious rate will probably mean in the long term that it will cause fewer people will die. 10% of people died in SARS. I suspect the mortality rate with this infection will be lower than that as it spreads to a much wider population. So what we have is a broader infection with probably a less marked number of people, percentage of people dying. But that, in some ways, from a public health perspective, is harder to deal with. We can't predict the future, and we're living in a period of great uncertainty at the moment because we don't have all the information we need. China recognized this, it shared the information very quickly. That was different to SARS, and therefore it alerted the world to this outbreak happening. That would not have happened maybe 10 or 20 years ago, and we should congratulate China in the way they've been open and sharing of the information. The future, the world has got to think about how we can prepare now by developing vaccines. Richard will talk about that, drugs that may counter this infection, but also what we can do at a public health and societal level to try and prevent the epidemic spreading further than it might otherwise do.
Thank you, Jeremy. Richard, do you have any points to add?
I think Jeremy has given a terrific summary of